Pinkertons Ghosts is a horror anthology podcast by Superversive Radio, with no affiliation with any detective agency, person, real or imagined, or the dark forces of Outre Terre. It is not intended for children.
This is Jim Donavan. Time is 10 a.m. I've had my morning coffee, and the world is at peace once again, thanks to me. The team had finally gotten back from hell. We had failed to rescue Jack's mom, but at least we'd freed him from Hades' clutches, so glass half full. And I was restless. Once I had walked Sean along the Egyptian path to hell, I hadn't really done much. I just kinda disassociated for a while there. It happens. I've seen things that mortal man wasn't meant to. Ever read a Lovecraft novel? My mind is basically in a constant state of Cthulhian panic. And my trip to hell made that just a little bit worse. Regardless, getting sidetracked again, when I entered my apartment, I got a call. I rarely answer my phone these days. It's almost always a scam artist, or Sean trying to get me some sort of training nonsense with the rookies. They're gonna die in the field anyway. I don't get the point in wasting time training them. This time, though, I absent-mindedly answered it. A habit from a bygone era. Good morning. Jim Donavan speaking, I answered, as I dropped the backpack that had Gordon O'Hedesy inside. My parents raised my brother and I to be ever so professional on the phone. So stupid. Hello, Jim. Lana's back. You should have killed her. I'm still tired from the drive back. I'm sorry. Who is this? This is... I can't remember what bloody told you. Necromancer. Labrea Tarpitz. Earlier this year at the observatory. Hawkwood's kid. I told you to end her. You said you were a killer, but not a murderer. Some such a rot. Anyway, she's back at her old schemes. Is trying to bring Daddy Dearest back again. Isn't she tired of this yet? Why can't she just be her own man? Because she's a woman. Not that this is a permanent barrier to entry these days. Anyway, yeah, I'm part of the group chat. They decided to make a golem, using the very mud from the place you killed Hawkwood. And I'm going to try and conjure a spirit on the exact same ground. There's now only North Hollywood. There's no mud there. Look, mate, I'm not going to argue semantics with you. Only that this is what they're trying to do. Speaking of, what are you going to do about it? I stopped and thought for a moment. My knee-jerk was to say, kill them all, let God sort his own. Because why not? There's a proven paranormal Pinkerton method these days. I was getting tired of this nonsense. I had left Lana alive once before, and now she'd killed, well, who knew how many people. There's a fair bet she was going to have to kill someone for this ritual. There's also a decent chance that this was a trap for me, much like the last time was. Still, though, John had risked his life to save me from Lana. And yes, Control, I did check the old archives. That was the name he gave me. Anyway, it had to count for something. Plus, if Hawkwood's little band of cultists and megalomaniacs were successful in raising Hawkwood as a golem, it wouldn't be hard for him to raise a whole army of golems. And that army of golems would probably be near invincible creations that have demons or monster souls powering them. There is no happy end to that scenario. I'm going to do what I should have done, I said. Resigned. Bloody rot you are. I've been working the last 2 days in the alleyway. I'll be finished around midnight tonight. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I erupted. Because you seem like the type who's prone to back out, given enough time. I don't want that to happen. Besides, you went down to hell while this was going on. That crap echoes, mate. Congrats on coming out. Gives you real street cred. I was tempted to throw my phone across the room. Instead, I said, "You're an ass," and hung up. I slid down the wall I was leaning on and rested my head on my knees. I knew nothing about golems. I do, however, have an ancient, seemingly all-knowing disembodied head who knows way more than he ought to. So from the ground I called out, "Gordon? Golems? What do we know?" From the bag I'd left on the floor, I heard, "Jewish myth. Basically Frankenstein, but made out of mud instead of dead parts. Properly interpreted, it was supposed to be a tale of hubris, of man's attempt to be the Almighty. But in the last 100 years or so, it's become more of an empowerment fantasy." Okay, but what is it? "Oh, basically there's a book of magic, supposedly written by King Solomon, that gives away the secret to creating life by using the name of the Almighty, and a series of mathematical equations. In all the stories, it's always a rabbi, which is stupid. Anyone can do it. And they take mud, sculpt a man from the mud, and chant from this book. Takes 3 days and 3 nights to conjure life, and the final night has to end on a Friday, which means life is created on the 6th day, kind of like, the story. Which is why John told me the ritual would finish tonight. I hate these guys. Yeah, they're easy to hate. Fighting the cultists again, seeing Lana Hawkwood again, was not high up on my list of Saturday afternoon fun. As these were vanilla mortals, firearms tended to work pretty well, so I made sure my Colt 1911 was oiled, that I had several fresh magazines to keep it well fed. I was going to be in North Hollywood, which is that perfect combination of bougie art district and overly poor ghetto slum. Hipsters and hobos alike make North Hollywood an undesirable hellhole for any reasonable man, which means that the police would be more on guard. As these cultists were rich, I decided I'd have to operate on the assumption that the police were in on the take. I'd have to be extra cautious where firearms were used. I pondered my options. I decided to call up Father Smith to get some advice. Not entirely sure how connected he is, but I've watched him order around a team of battle friars, monks with submachine guns. It was a fair bet they could be handy in a pinch. I explained the situation to him, and he was not pleased. "James, I know you struggle mightily against your own temptation for power, but it is not a good idea for you to engage in this particular mission." "Yeah, sure, Father, I got it. Don't use magic. But if I don't, nothing's going to happen. And this whole kerfuffle is going to get a lot of people killed. God understands. He needs my help here." "Don't be a blasphemer, my son. God does not need anything, especially from you. It is a privilege that he lets us help him. If he has warned you away from magic, then it is an absolute truth that he would never send you a moral quandary where you'd need to use it." "Then perhaps you would care to handle Lana?" "I am leading a team in San Diego. I shall wrap up what we're working on here and get to you as soon as possible. Do not attempt to stop this on your own. And most of all, do not further imperil your immortal soul by touching the arcane tonight." I sighed and made a half-hearted promise. Little Priest was a good man, but I understand that sometimes you have to do things that are unsavory in order to aid the greater good. Plus, I don't know. I guess I didn't trust that he'd arrive in time to stop the whole thing. I tried to hold off on using magic, but if it looked like I had no other choice, I'd tap into the Verum Visio and rip reality asunder to prevent Nigel Hawkwood from assuming mortal form on this plane of existence. With any luck, I could just send him straight back to hell where he belonged. Ever since the bombing at the Burbank Hotel, I've been looking for ways to effectively reproduce homemade explosives. This can be tricky, as the FBI does its level-headed best to guard this information. Ammonium nitrate is the key ingredient to any homemade bomb, and while one can get it from fertilizer, Home Depot has been altering their formula to make it less reactive. This doesn't mean impossible, it just means there are extra steps that one needs to go through in order to make fertilizer a true party favor. Fortunately, Jack has been training the newbies on just such a process, and I've been listening in from the back of the classroom. Really picked his brain on the secure line. Come to think of it, I perfectly match the stereotype profile for a media frenzy. Loner male in his 30s, white with some education. Well, if making myself a domestic terrorist was what I needed to do to save humanity, I suppose it's worth it. Pittance St. Devay is going to have an aneurysm when I get arrested, I'm sure. Anyway, I had 200 pounds of explosion-grade ammonium nitrate. Don't ask me how, Control. Jack's been very efficient, and I have a lot of downtime between missions. Science is a kind of magic if you don't understand words like covalent bonds, right? I took an Uber to South LA, the scarier, poorer parts of the city. I found a car on a side street that had been abandoned, but looked serviceable. I let out a thread of magic through the Verimbicio. Sorry, Father Smith. And picked the lock on the vehicle. I then used a similar thread to spark the ignition. Easy peasy, car ran fine. It would do in a pinch. Drove it back to my apartment. It was already 2 p.m. I had to rush. I collected all the ammonium nitrate I had, along with several gallons of gasoline, and stuffed them in this new vehicle. I wiped all evidence that could link me back to the vehicle, or the explosions, and then sat in the car for a solid 30 minutes. I used up valuable preparation time creating a sort of arcane dead man's switch for the explosions. If mundane means failed, if I couldn't stop the cultists myself, I needed to be able to take them out and stop the experiment. I designed it so that I had to constantly be threading some magic into the car to keep it from exploding. Basically, if I was knocked unconscious or was killed, the car would explode. And considering where I intended to park the vehicle, it would take out or at least disrupt the ritual, and give Father Smith time to stop it at a later date. As soon as I felt comfortable that the switch would work as intended, I loaded up my weapons. My soul stone, my kinetic rings. I gave Lizzie a kiss and a pet goodbye, and I drove my stolen car to a bar in a few back streets off of North Hollywood. It was around 9 p.m. in a seedier part of town. Not by LA standards, but bad by the standards north of the Hollywood Hills. As I suspected, the area was cordoned off like someone was shooting a movie in the area. Happens so frequently around here that most people are more bored and just ignore film shoots entirely. There were lights erected everywhere. Police were stationed at the major intersections. I had planned for this. Remember, I live here. I'm used to it. And because I'm used to this area in particular, I knew something they didn't. I knew of a back road that leads to a culvert that leads to the LA River that flows right underneath the bar. Even though it had been a wet winter, it's been pretty dry the last couple of months. The LA River has been dry for the previous 2 weeks, which means I could go through the culvert to the river and drive on the concrete to directly underneath the bar. I left my last resort and began my infiltration. That part of the plan went off without a hitch. No one saw me. I was a ghost. The best stealth is always done when absolutely no one is around to watch you be unstealthy. I made my way up the concrete slopes of the LA River to the area behind the bar. It wasn't unguarded, but it was less busy here for sure. Some guys were standing around in black robes. Nice to know the classics are being observed. I waited until one of them separated himself from the pack to avoid his bladder. When he was about 30 feet away from the bright lights, I pounced on him in the darkness and hit him brutally on the head with the butt of my Colt 1911. He slumped to the ground, bonelessly. I comforted my conscience with the fact that this guy was almost certainly evil. All the guys that worked for Lana were. Even still, I checked his pulse. He was alive. I would put in an anonymous call to 911 before I left. I slipped on his cloak, disposed of his unconscious, zip-tied and gagged body into a dumpster, and went into the light, holding my gun loosely underneath my robes in my right hand. As I walked closer to the light, I heard a couple of other men in cloaks speaking in low voices. Hey, do you think we're going to hit golden time tonight? I mean, we've gotten there each of the last 2 nights, after all. If I know production, I'm going to take it right up to the limit, then call the whole thing right before they have to pay us all that extra. Still, though, $1,000 a day on a union shoot to do literally nothing but stand around and chant? Doesn't get any easier than that. Okay, so maybe my cultist wasn't evil. That's a problem for future Jim. If I allowed myself to feel anything now, I'd be lost. I walked past them. I heard one of the cultists whisper, "Oh, he gets to be in the scene, and now he's too good for us?" Background actors are the worst. I walked through the chaos. I guess I guess this really was a film set. Or rather, they disguised it as such in order to pass the various requirements necessary. I was getting a little headache from holding enough magic to keep the car bomb from exploding. I hadn't considered that. Maybe I shouldn't have done such a taxing spell. Hindsight is 20/20, and hopefully I'd live long enough to enjoy the fruits of hindsight. Still, a lot of innocent lives at risk here, beyond the totally innocent man I just knocked unconscious. I walked past busy crewmen, moving every which way, and saw a lot of people in those dark robes. Probably all of whom were actors. Hard to tell. I followed the train of people moving forward, where the bar proper found itself. There were lights running everywhere. Giant lights that looked like blimps, and huge cords underfoot everywhere. The majority of people were congregating around the alley where I ambushed Hawkwood. And I saw Lana, sitting in one of those folding chairs that say director, staring intently down the alley. I could hear chanting. I could smell iron. I could see a group of men in those black robes saying the same lines over and over again, huddled around some lump on the ground. There were red Hebrew words on the wall. They had decorated the whole thing in blood. All of a sudden, Lana shouted, "Cut! That's extra right there! He's off!" A man with a clipboard rushed to where the hooded men were chanting, and pulled one figure out of the circle. All the other hoods stood around. One pulled out a phone, but tried to be secretive. Lana perked up again. "And that extra has his phone out!" The man with the clipboard turned back in time to see the phone man hastily put his hands behind his back and feign innocence. He rushed back to grab that extra, and with a loud voice said, "Remember, people, no phones on set. You all signed NDAs, and if we see your phone, that's ground for immediate termination." He hustled both extras off, and another man called out, "Reset!" Orderly chaos proceeded. I followed the three men to a back room in the bar. I saw more cords and monitors set up everywhere inside, along with about 10 or 15 men or women huddled around one of those monitors, sitting in cloth-folding chairs, looking important. A security guard stopped me and asked me where I was going. I pointed to the trio and said, "He told me to follow him, so..." And the security guard stepped aside. Acting stupid and appealing to a higher authority has gotten me into more closed doors than either magic or lockpicks combined. I followed the men to a back room. The non-robed man stepped aside to let the two robed figures enter first, and then he followed after them. Because his back was to me, he still didn't know I was following, and he let the door close behind him. I could hear another door open inside. I stopped at the first door before going in, because I could smell blood. And a second later, I heard two muffled bangs. I looked behind me. No one came down the hallway to investigate. Some sort of ambush. Those two extras. Dead for making rookie errors. I pulled my Colt from underneath my robes. If no one was going to come for a couple of gunshots, the odds were good they wouldn't come for a couple more. I ripped open the door with my left hand, threw myself inside, shut the door as fast as I could behind me. No one here but a small hallway. As expected, this served as an airlock. I heard two muffled voices past the second door. "Two more idiots couldn't follow instructions, huh? Makes it easier in the long run. Fewer of us have to volunteer if these morons continue to not follow orders." I hate this part. Yeah, but it'll be worth it when he returns. I guessed the first door muffled most of the noise, since I could hear voices so easily through the second door. I threw open the second door with my left, stepped inside, ignored the startled voices, and pulled the second door behind me. I let out 2 shots of my Colt 1911 into the 2 men standing there, holding the body of one of the robed figures. They were regular guys, killing people for the sake of the ritual. Death was too good for them. I've already seen the eternal justice that awaited them with my own eyes. Still, can't be too careful with necromancers. Can't make a zombie without a head. Thank goodness my clothes were already red. I grabbed the one guy's clipboard and his hat. If I ran around looking busy, there was a good chance no one would look too closely, and I'd be fine. Fortunately, he had a beard too. Unfortunately, his beard was black instead of red. I'd stay in dark areas. I checked my phone. It was nearly midnight. Time flies when you're murdering cultists. I walked past the rows of people huddled around the monitors. I decided to walk towards the ritual site. Perhaps there would be some sort of ritual doodad I could destroy. As it was, there were too many innocents present for me to set off the car bomb. But if that golem were created, there would be a great deal more innocent life lost. If only I'd not been so self-righteous and just killed Lana when I had the chance. Actually, why not leverage that? She was some sort of link to this whole thing. If I threatened her, maybe it would force her to end this whole thing. If there's one thing necromancers fear, it's death. Irony, huh? I walked outside. My gun was drawn within the cloak. I walked over to where Lana was seated in her director's chair. It was currently between takes, so she was barking orders, and there was general organized chaos all around. No one was sitting with her. No one was guarding her. I took advantage of this, stood right behind her, placed the barrel of my Colt on the base of her neck, and said, "Let's end this now, Lana." Several people saw this and reacted. Vanilla mortals seemed to think it had to be a part of the script that they hadn't seen. Everyone else that was directly related to the ritual, they recognized me. Lana, ever cool and collected, said in that posh accent, "Continue as planned. I shall deal with this." Chaos resumed. The chanting continued, and had grown in intensity since I last heard it. I guess they'd switched out real cultists for the extras. It was the hour of decision, after all. They weren't even bothering with the facade of a film set anymore. "Jim, to what do I owe the displeasure?" "You're going to stop all this right now, or I'm going to decorate the set with your grey matter." "Oh, how crude," she said, as she turned to face me. Didn't realize the chair had a swivel. The chanting was starting to sound like screaming. I looked over at it to see that there was a glow around the lump at their feet. Now that I was where I should be, I saw that where the cultists were standing in the alley, the whole alley was painted in blood, with the Hebrew letters and numbers, not just a little bit like I first initially saw. I even recognized the name of God scrawled on the wall. Blasphemy. "I'm serious, Lana. It's not too late. Your soul's not yet damned, though I'd wager it's close." "Oh, Jim," she said, with a sad smile. "We're all damned. Now and forever." She grabbed my hand with a grip that felt stronger than she should be capable of, and said, "I didn't think I'd have the courage to take this final step. Thank you for showing up to give me that push. This wouldn't have been possible without you." The gun moved to her heart. Then I felt the muscles in my right trigger finger contract against my will. The gun sang out. Lana collapsed into my arms as I dropped the gun. With her dying breath, she said, "Oh, now he will live and thank me." The chanting stopped. The glowing golem suddenly turned black as pitch, as black as a starless night. From where I was, I could see the form take definition. Its eyes opened as it said, "Finally, now I am a mudman." I recognized that voice. It wasn't Hawkwood. The golem reached out its left hand as if to give the nearest cultist a loving caress. "So fragile," it said, as it crushed the man's head like a rotten egg. Screams rang out everywhere. Suddenly no one cared that I was holding the lifeless body of the director. The golem ripped limbs and heads off the other cultists surrounding it, with a speed that belied its size. As it stood, yes, it dismembered 4 cultists before it even stood. It towered at 8 feet tall, and was surely 400 or 500 pounds. Men with guns rushed onto the scene and sprayed the beast. Nothing. It didn't care. It tore through them like rice paper. I was the only one who could stop it. As I was responsible for the final death it needed to live, it was appropriate that I pull a Samson and die with my enemy. I reached out to the Verum Vicio, to the thread that I had been holding taut. And as I did that, the monster turned its head towards me and looked. It was 20 feet away and was holding a PA by the arm. "Hello, Jim," Golem, nay Loki, said. "Do you like the new body I found? I'm worried it makes me look fat." As he spoke, he walked slowly towards me and plucked the limbs off the PA like it was nothing. Reached down for the gun that I had dropped, and, still holding on, I put the PA out of its misery. "Oh, that wasn't fun, Jim. I wanted to watch him struggle. Oh well, I can be satisfying knowing that this will eat at your conscience for all eternity." "You were supposed to be Hawkwood." "Yes, well, I saw an opportunity to have a body, and I took it. There is nothing so satisfying as when you fools deliver to me what I could never do myself." "Ha! Made in his image, indeed." As he spoke, I gathered the will and the mental fortitude, and I let loose the destructive energy that would trigger the car bomb. No boom. "Oh, did your big plan fail? Did someone magically disarm your magic bomb? Oh, how sad for you!" "Die a failure, Jim." He reached a bloody hand to me. I could not escape. I could smell the strange smells of blood and clay getting closer. Something crackled over the air. Loki's head snapped towards the noise. So did mine. The battle friars had arrived. Father Smith was holding a megaphone and a cross, and shouting at the top of his lungs some sort of exorcism ritual. One of the battle friars had a good grip on his collar and on the bars of the helicopter. Another was ringing a golden bell, and another was preparing a giant aspergillum the size of a morning star. "We shall finish this at another time, Jim," Loki growled, and bounded off into the night. Another helicopter followed him. I collapsed, exhausted. The battle friars took control of the scene. When he had the time, Father Smith found me. "My son, you have erred. You should have waited. You should not have touched the profanity of the arcane. What if more innocents had died at your hand instead of rogue sorcerers and their deceived cultists? I did not realize the Paranormal Pinkertons could spare you for a suicide mission." "Father," I said, exhausted and stunned. I couldn't get angry. Couldn't focus on anything else. I couldn't wait any longer. It was getting close to midnight. I watched them kill 2 innocent people. And when I went into the room they were slaughtered in, they were clearly not the first to die. He jabbed my chest. "God does not need us, and with respect, we do not need you. Your efforts were unnecessary, and now you have a burden to your conscience and a monster who hates you on the loose. He will kill more for the sheer joy of sending men and women and children to hell. Perhaps the fear of death would have kept the last necessary sacrifice from being performed before we arrived. Lana was the only one present with the power in her blood to complete the ritual. You think this is the first golem we have shot down? This year?" Father Smith raised his eyes to the sky, and I heard the click of a rosary being prayed in his offhand. I didn't even see him pull it out. He sighed. "My son, the Lord allows us to be tested with disappointment, pain, and so much more. The point of these tests is not to destroy us, even if it feels like they might, even if it feels like madness. The point of them is as fire to metal. It purifies the soul in its relation to God. It is like exercise in the body. It is like study in the mind. You cannot grow unless you accept what God has ordained. You cannot grow without giving up what is important to you, to God." This was one of those times. And I will have to accept that lesson too. James, get out of our sight. He's right, Control. I know. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I need to find a way to stop Loki and send him back to hell where he belongs. Maybe the Catholics will help, but I'd trust Jack and Sean more. Until next time, this is Jim Donavan. Over and out.
Pinkerton's Ghosts is a podcast distributed by Superversive Radio, licensed under an attribution non-commercial, share-alike international license. This episode was written by Ken Dickerson and performed by the same. Ben Wheeler edits, directs, produces, and herds cats. Ken Dickerson performs our audio editing. Visit us on Facebook, read articles on superversivesf.com, or listen to us on unauthorized Acast, iTunes, or Spotify. Contact us through Twitter at @PinkertonsGhosts, email us at pinkertonsghosts@gmail.com, or send us noble messenger possums with messages strapped to their backs. Don't worry, they know how to find us. Thank you for listening, and good luck.